Hi, my name's Laura Henry Harrison, and I am the Project Officer for the Jewish History Association of South Wales. We've been putting together a series of talks on the smaller Jewish communities that were throughout the South Wales valleys. Most of these are no longer in operation today. So today I'd like to tell you a little bit more about the Jewish community in Port Talbot. So if I could sum up the Jewish community in Port Talbot in a few words, it would be from discord to harmony. There are some rather unkind portrayals of local Jews in the newspapers from the early 1900s, but by the Second World War, the Port Talbot Jewish community had become a beacon of interfaith dialogue and understanding. The county borough of Neath Port Talbot was created in 1996, with this merger encompassing three former Jewish congregations, Aberavon and Port Talbot, Neath and Ystalyfera. Today, we will mainly be looking at the community in Port Talbot and Aberavon. We've been very fortunate to capture memories of the Port Talbot Jewish community in our oral history interviews, so I would like to share some of these voices with you today. The earliest recorded Jewish resident in Aberavon dates back to the 1870s, but an organised community did not appear until the beginning of the 20th century. They officially established themselves as a community in 1904, which means that there were enough Jews in the town to form their own minyan, which is a group of 10 men over the age of 13, which would enable full services to take place. Newspaper articles suggest that the community would use the Constitutional Hall for functions before they had their own synagogue. This article from the Cambrian newspaper in 1908 describes the first Jewish wedding to take place in Port Talbot. Apparently, the ceremony attracted great public interest. The Port Talbot Synagogue was not established until much later in 1919, but it was still a tiny community with only 22 members and 35 children registered in 1923. The heyday of the community was noted in the Jewish yearbook figures of 1934, when there were 99 members. By 1946, this had halved. Port Talbot never established its own Jewish burial ground, with burials taking place at Swansea Jewish Cemetery. So let's look at the early years of the community. There are a number of articles in the local press which reports on incidents between Jews and the local community, often with quite serious incidents being treated with strange levels of hilarity, and often with the article stating Jew in big bold letters. The earliest dates back to 1893, when Meyer Seisen, a Jew, was charged with the theft of a gold watch, a gold ring, and a silver chain. He had taken these items from pawnbroker Mr. I. Jones and picture framer F. Finkelstein. Meyer fled Aberavon and was later captured in Manchester. In 1901, the allegations were made again against a Jewish resident of Ystalyfera, where Solomon Furman was accused of arson at his employer's ironmongery, as he had been seen fleeing the premises shortly before. The magistrate dismissed the case due to lack of evidence. In 1903, we see an article titled Jew Gets Justice, where Jacob Finkelstein, a painter and decorator on Station Road in Aberavon, summoned Elizabeth Davis for assault. Elizabeth claimed she was defending her son, and the son also accused Finkelstein of assault. The cause of the dispute was a group of boys constantly ringing his shop bell. The young boy called to his mother that Mr. Finkelstein was hitting him, so she proceeded to grab Mr. Finkelstein by the collar and struck him in the face while threatening him. The court found in favour of Mr. Finkelstein, and they fined Elizabeth, while dismissing all other charges. Another case of assault in Port Talbot was reported in 1909. Jewish man Walter Easterbrook was accused of assault by his neighbour John Bynan. Walter had struck him in the face with a tin opener, causing 2 gashes on his cheek which required stitches. Walter denied the charges, but was found guilty and ordered to pay costs. What is interesting is the description of the court case, where it was found to have caused much merriment due to the dialect and mannerisms of the parties involved, presenting quite a severe case with a strange air of frivolity. In 1915, a large headline reads, Jew and Gentile shake hands and make friends. Ben Newman, a traveller from Port Talbot, summoned Ben Williams, a tailor from Aberavon, to court. Mr. Newman had gone to the tailor's shop to complain about substandard work, and then Mr. Williams, denying any mistake, said, "Get out, you expletive Jew," and smacked him in the face. The local mayor asked if the matter could be settled amicably, and it was done so with a handshake. and apparently all parties left the court smiling in what was described as a pleasing Aberafan court finale. We cannot help but wonder if Mr. Newman was as pleased with this outcome as he showed on the outside. So it appears that there were several occasions showing discord between the Jewish and non-Jewish community. This, however, drastically changed after the appointment of Reverend Maurice Landy in 1936, who spent a significant portion of his career promoting interfaith dialogue. Reverend Landy was born to a prominent Jewish family in Llanelli, and he left Wales due to a lack of yeshivas for his religious education. He first attended a yeshiva in Manchester and then Talmudical College in Liverpool. After a brief period in Southport, he returned to Wales to become reader, teacher, and shochet, which is the ritual slaughter of kosher meats, to the Aberafan and Port Talbot Hebrew congregation. He held this position for 6 years, and during this time he lectured extensively to non-Jewish gatherings about Jewish subjects, and was also active on the Wartime Joint Emergency Committee. At the beginning of the Second World War, Reverend Landy also spoke to many non-Jewish groups about the plight of Jewish refugees in Europe, and raised many donations to aid the cause. Reverend Landy's lectures would have titles such as "World Problems Cannot Be Solved by the Destruction of the Jew" and "The Jewish Problem," very much placing anti-Semitism at the centre of his talks. He would lecture to Wesleyans, Methodists, Baptist groups, and many others in pursuit of greater understanding and tolerance towards the Jewish people. He would not only lecture to religious groups, but also non-Jewish youth groups such as the Grange Street Young People's Society. He only stayed in Port Talbot for 6 years, leaving in 1942. It is impossible to quantify the lasting impact Reverend Landy's community work had, but I like to romanticise it somewhat and hope that his lectures led to greater understanding and tolerance between the Jewish and non-Jewish communities for years to come. According to Bennett Aon, a Welsh Jewish comedian, he never experienced any anti-Semitism in Port Talbot when he was growing up. Here he describes his experiences.
It was, it was difficult. It was difficult being the only Jewish family. Never came up against anti-Semitism, I have to say. There were, never, apart from the occasional jocular, "Your people killed our Lord," that type of thing. No, that didn't happen. But we didn't come up against anti-Semitism. Friends, I remember some of my friends' fathers used to say, "Well, there's just cockles, you can eat those," or "Come on, it's Christmas, have a bit of turkey." But never, ever did I face anti-Semitism. I remember I used to take in matzah to school on Pesach, because just to show the kids what I was eating, and they were fascinated by it. So it wasn't, I never felt that I was being picked on for being Jewish. I was picked on for being Welsh, which is weird considering the schools in Wales. Maybe it was an excuse. But no, I never came up against any anti-Semitism. It was difficult. It was difficult growing up as the only Jewish family there, really.
However, Bennett goes on to describe some of the cooperation between the Jewish and non-Jewish community on the Jewish Sabbath back in his grandparents' generation.
So going back to when I was watching the programme you did for the BBC, you were talking about somebody that used to come into the home on Sabbath to do things like turning on the lights and things. Could you tell me a bit more about that, please?
Yeah, so because my grandparents were very Orthodox, very religious, they couldn't light a fire on a Saturday because you mustn't strike a match as part of the laws. So all the religious families would have somebody to come and light the fire for them. And the person who lit my grandparents' fire was the son of the local baker, and that was Anthony Hopkins. So, which I think is lovely. And a couple of months ago, I managed to get hold of his email address and wrote to him and reminded him about this. And he remembered the whole thing, and he sent his regards to my dad. And he said he remembered the Factor family, he remembered growing up there. And so we've been chatting back and forth and sending each other pictures over the last couple of months, which has been really sweet.
That's really interesting. So was it worked out, was there a payment given for them to come and do this, or
No.
was it just a community thing?
Yeah, it was just a favor. I think my grandfather and Anthony Hopkins' father were friends.
So how old would Anthony Hopkins have been?
Oh, he would have been
doing
young.
this?
I reckon about 8 or 9, because he went with his dad to do it. So sometimes he would do it, sometimes his dad would do it. So yeah, I think he would have been young.
So what sort of memories does he have then that he's been passing on?
Just that about going there. And he said he always remembers going in and how chatting with my dad when they were little, as children, talking. And yes, and about the other Jewish families that lived there, and about the street that it was on. That's about it, really.
So he has fond memories of the Jewish community then?
Absolutely.
In 2010, over 100 students and staff at the Neathport Talbot College attended the opening of a Holocaust memorial garden, which was constructed by the students. A Holocaust survivor was invited to speak at the opening, and she was overwhelmed by the sensitivity of the design. The Jewish community in Port Talbot had vanished several decades prior to this, so it's interesting that they chose to commemorate this event with a memorial, and one has to wonder if they knew of the Jewish community that once existed in their own town. So from talking about the disappearance of the congregation, I would now like to jump back in time and tell you a little bit about the Port Talbot Synagogue. This slide shows a drawing of the original Port Talbot Synagogue, which was opened in 1921. And this is the Port Talbot Synagogue as it looks today, with no visible features of its previous religious purpose. Here, David Factor tells us about his memories of the Port Talbot Synagogue from his childhood through to its eventual closure in the 1950s.
Can we go back to the Port Talbot Synagogue?
Yeah.
So what are your memories of the synagogue?
Memories with the synagogue, it was a ground floor building only, with the ark where the scrolls of law are kept was at one far end. There was what we call a bimah, which is the raised platform where the minister does the service, or whoever's taking the service, was in the middle of the building. There were benches, which were the seats on each side of the bimah, and then there was a section then not roped off, but it was sectioned off with wooden panels, and behind that the lady sat. And then there was toilet facilities there. I cannot remember any kitchen facilities there, but there must have been something for the odd snacks and that must have been there. In this building, then I used to go once a week then for what is known as Chayil lessons, which were the Hebrew classes on a Sunday, and these were taken then by either a minister who would be a reverend, not a rabbi, because obviously rabbis were few and far between, or he would be a lay person who would come and teach us on a Sunday for a few hours.
Okay. Was it highly decorated, or was it plain?
No, it was very plain. Very plain.
And was it custom built, or was it?
I would think it was custom built because of the seating arrangements. Then that I would think it was custom built. It was built, I would think, about early 1900s, and I mean really early 1900s, probably perhaps before 1910. And my great grandfather, Jacob Rosenberg, was instrumental in being one of the founders of the synagogue there.
Right. So how long were you going to Port Talbot Synagogue for?
I went to Port Talbot Synagogue probably until I was about 11.
Right.
And then I would have gone into the grammar school when I was in September 1951, and I continued then my Hebrew education in Swansea Synagogue, although we didn't have a synagogue then because it was destroyed in the Second World War, and they had a building then which they used as a synagogue in Christina Street, Swansea.
Right.
And I used to go 4 times a week from Port Talbot to Swansea. There was no bridge what was known the Britain Ferry Bridge then, which crossed the river, with the result then that the way you had to go was from, I used to take a bus from Port Talbot, leave school early, before school finished, and go then from Port Talbot to Britain Ferry, to Neath, to Skewen, to Morriston, arriving in Swansea, which took an hour. Nowadays, it takes about 25 minutes. I did that 4 times a week, which then would mean I would have to then get the homework or the exercise books from my fellow pupils then to do the catching up for the period I missed school. There was never any problem in having time off from school to go. The only problem was me having to catch up then the next day. And I used to do this on a Sunday, a Monday, a Tuesday and a Thursday.
So what happened to the Port Talbot Synagogue?
The Port Talbot Synagogue eventually, well, it was already closed by then. It was reopened sometime later for the wedding of my cousin Avril Abraham, and she married Nat Abraham from India, from Calcutta. It was reopened for that, but they had to clean it all out. They had to repair the floorboards. It was wooden floor. Had to repair the floorboards, I believe that was the last time it was used. It then deteriorated. I mean, it was hard. There was not many Jewish people in Port Talbot at that time. My uncle, who had been called Isaac Factor, who had been there, he had all titles, president, secretary, treasurer, the lot. He had a stroke and couldn't deal with anything. He subsequently died, and I got in touch with somebody called Oscar Benjamin, who was a solicitor in Swansea, and asked him would he get involved, because we had to dispose of the synagogue then, because it was fallen into rack and ruin, and the local authority said it had to be done up. Well, we had no money, there was no funds there at all, and what we arranged was a bank overdraft, or I arranged a bank overdraft then. I think it was the Midland Bank in Port Talbot, which became HSBC, to let us have money then, to give us an overdraft, then to do the roof. We made application to the charity commissioners because the records had all been lost then. So from myself and Oscar Benjamin, and I think it was one other, to be appointed trustees, and then who had the right then to dispose of the property. We disposed of the property, paid off the bank loan, and the balance of the funds, with the Charity Commissioner's permission, we then invested with the income to go to Swansea Hebrew Congregation, on the basis that the members who were left in Port Talbot, very few, had become members of Swansea Hebrew Congregation. The Charity Commissioners didn't object to that. And it has continued that the capital is invested, and the income, which is very small now because of interest rates, and because we didn't get much for the sale of the property, is paid to Swansea Hebrew Congregation. From memory, the property was sold to the Christadelphians. I know it was a religious organisation. I'm pretty sure it was the Christadelphians.
This would have been what, early 1970s when it was?
Yeah, I believe I was already. I am pretty sure I was already married, and we got married in '67. So yeah, it would be the early '70s, the charity still remains. I think it's called the Port Talbot Synagogue Trust Fund, or words to that effect, and the charity is still in being. We still pay the income to Swansea Hebrew Congregation.
And the synagogue would have shut, what, in the mid-1950s, something like that?
No, I would say the end of the 50s, right. Because or possibly early. No, sorry, not the end of the 50s, no, the beginning of the 50s, because although I was bar mitzvahed there, yeah. I was already having my lessons, Hebrew lessons, in Swansea. And I was bar mitzvahed when I was 13, which is 53, so it would be before 53.
It was important for Jewish families in Port Talbot and Aberavon to observe kosher rules when it came to their meat. This small community could not sustain its own kosher butcher's shop, but the local non-Jewish butcher named Saunders would sell the approved meat from his shop on Water Street. Here David remembers keeping kosher in his grandmother's time.
Do you know what the arrangements were in Port Talbot when you were young?
Yes, there was. There was a kosher butcher, non-Jewish again, who started and carried on until the numbers dropped again.
Yeah.
I remember exactly where it is. I can just remember the shop, and I must be very young at the time. I also remember that my grandmother used to get chickens, and probably got chickens from the Welsh valleys, Carmarthen, Pontarven, like that. And the shochet would come down and kill the chickens in the backyard. And I always remember, it's a horrible thing now, is the chicken without its head would fly up and perch somewhere. It's a horrible thing, you know. I remember that when I was a little kid. Something that sticks in your mind.
Bennett Aon grew up as the community was at its smallest, and he recalls how his family observed kosher rules without access to local amenities.
Because did your family keep kosher in the house?
They did, yes, absolutely.
So where did they get the food from then, if you were such a small number of Jews in the village?
The Cardiff. So we would go on a trip every month, as far as I can remember, to Cardiff. I remember we go to the butchers in Cardiff. I still remember, I mean, as a child, I can still smell the smell of meat and sawdust on the floor of the butchers when I think about it, which even as a child I didn't like. I mean, now I haven't eaten meat now for about 30 years, but I still got that memory of that. And the guy said, and having the chickens out the back, and it was all a bit weird. So we would go and get the food, as far as I can remember, from Cardiff.
The decline of the community had a large impact on Bennett's family's religious observance. The family would now have to travel to Swansea for all their religious needs, and for Orthodox Jews this presented many challenges.
Did she regularly attend synagogue?
Well, we lived in Baglan and Port Talbot, and there wasn't a synagogue, and the closest synagogue is the one in Swansea. Now, we had a religious upbringing, which meant we didn't travel on Shabbat, so we couldn't go to the synagogue. So my dad had to make a decision whether we travelled and went to the synagogue, or didn't travel and kept religious at home. And he decided that his concern was, if we did travel to the synagogue, what would happen is that we would probably, on the way back from the synagogue, go, oh, we need some shopping. So we'd pop into, the shops to buy something. And then the whole idea of Shabbat or Shabbos would be forgotten about, and it would be a spiral downwards. So he decided that we would be religious at home. So we used to pray at home on the Shabbos morning, and it was really difficult, to be honest, because none of my friends are Jewish. There were no Jewish families around, and my family was the only Jewish family in Port Talbot. When my dad grew up, there were loads. He used to tell me that the shul in Port Talbot was packed on a regular basis. You couldn't get a seat, but by the time I was born, our family was the only Jewish family there.
The decline of the community had a large impact on Bennett's family's religious observance. The family would now have to travel to Swansea for all their religious needs, and for Orthodox Jews this presented many challenges.
So how did you prepare then, with the synagogue being so far away?
In what way, sorry?
For your bar mitzvah, did you have somebody come to the house to give you lessons?
Oh, no. So I think it was every Sunday or whatever it was, I used to go over it and work with the minister, and he would teach me the piece. And my dad bought a cassette recorder. I always remember this, so that he could record it, so that the minister could record it, and I could learn it that way. And then I sang it. I say sang. I'm probably the only tone-deaf Welsh person in the world, so I don't know if I can use the word sing, because you wouldn't recognise it as singing. But I tried my best.
I would now like to tell you a little bit about Lily Tobias, because I do like a little bit of women's history. Many of you will be familiar with her nephews, author Danny Abzey and former MP Leo Abzey. Lily was the child of Polish Jewish immigrants, and she grew up in Estelavera. Lily spoke Yiddish at home, English at school, and Welsh with her friends and neighbours. Lily had a fascinating life. She was a staunch Zionist, a suffragette, and a playwright and novelist. She was sadly widowed at a young age when her husband was killed in a riot in Palestine in 1938. Her nephews relaunched her novel Eunice Fleet in 2004, which is the fictional story of the wife of a conscientious objector. It draws on Lily's own experiences and the atmosphere of Cardiff during World War I, and made more poignant by the fact that two of Lily's brothers were conscientious objectors. The novel was originally published in 1933, but was out of print for over half a century. It was identified by Honno Welsh Women's Press as a book of such importance and literary merit that it deserved to be republished. Lily was herself heavily involved in pacifist activities, and she was described by the Labour politician Fenner Brockway as an active and belligerent pacifist, showing great courage in defying the authorities and assisting draft dodgers and those in prison. So finally, we'll move away from Lily's commitment to pacifism and talk a little bit about the military contribution of the Port Talbot Jewish community during both World Wars. For such a small community, many of their young men were involved in these conflicts. The community commissioned a roll of honour for those who served and those who fell in the First World War. This tablet is now in the Civic Centre here in Port Talbot. It shows that of the 14 soldiers who went to fight, 3 did not return home. Many of these young men were from the same family, and 2 of those who died, J. Lewis and A. Lewis, were likely related. Unfortunately, we've not been able to locate any records online to confirm their relationship. As far as we are aware, there is no tablet for those who fought in the Second World War, but articles in the Jewish Chronicle give us a small insight into the young men who fought. Sgt Major I Goldberg is mentioned as a member of the Welsh Regiment. He served in both World Wars, and his name is featured on the First World War Memorial tablet. In the First World War, he served with the West Yorkshire Regiment and the Green Howards. The article describes him as being chairman of the West Wales Old Contemptibles Association. There is a monument to the Old Contemptibles in Westminster Abbey, made of limestone and Welsh blue slate. The inscription reads, "Remember the Old Contemptibles, the British expeditionary force which served in Flanders within range of the enemy mobile artillery between the 5th of August and the 22nd of November 1914. At the First Battle of Ypres, their stand against a force of 10 times their number prevented the German advance against the Channel ports. Their commander was Field Marshal Sir John French, and their name came from the Kaiser's reference to Sir John French's contemptible little army. All ranks who served in France and Flanders within range of enemy artillery during the period noted on the memorial were entitled to call themselves Old Contemptibles." Gunner J.B. Rosenberg was also from Port Talbot and served in the Second World War. His father, Maurice Rosenberg, served in the Tank Corps in the First World War, and his name also appears on the War Memorial tablet. Private H. Factor served in the Royal Armoured Corps, and before he joined up, he was first violinist of the Port Talbot Symphony Orchestra. He was the son of Mr. Aaron Harris Factor, who was president of the Port Talbot Hebrew congregation for many years. Sadly, Mr. Factor died in 1940. He had been a prominent member of the Port Talbot community for over 25 years and was one of the founding members and president of the Synagogue until his death. He also served on the Port Talbot Hospital Committee. Finally, I would like to give a mention to Reverend Alec Ginsberg, who was a chaplain to Jewish national servicemen from 1945 to the end of conscription in 1963. Unfortunately, there are no photographs of Alec. He was born in Aberavon, and he was a twin and the youngest of 11 children. He went to study at Gateshead Yeshiva from the age of 11 and trained as a Moel during the London Blitz. A Moel performs circumcisions when Jewish boys are 8 days old. He travelled to Cyprus to circumcise the children in displaced persons camps established by the British to hold those trying to enter Palestine illegally before the State of Israel was established in 1948. He would use his military ambulance as a mobile synagogue. Interestingly, there is a website dedicated to Jewish servicemen who fought in the First World War. It's called We Were There Too. It is an excellent and quite comprehensive site, but when I went on to search for our 14 soldiers, not one was listed. There was also no search result for Port Talbot or Aberavon. This is an example of why the work we do in our organisation is so important. Through public donations, we are able to pursue projects so that information like this can be made freely available online. So perhaps one day we will be able to uncover the records of these soldiers and make sure that they're included with their peers online. So thank you for joining us today. If you would like to get any more information about our organisation or contact us for any reason, then here are our details. And thank you very much.